All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Morbid Symptoms podcast. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke, and I'm joined once again by the lovely Garrett Ramirez, aka the Social Populist. How are you doing today, Garrett?
Good. How are you?
Cool. Very good. Glad to hear it. So, what is our episode today? Schrödinger's American Revolution, dual critiques from far left and alt-right. So, what you want to make of the revolution and what you need it to be for you, and who's the heroes and who's the villains and who's misunderstood and who is the man of our time. Who's the best person to reference in your campaign ads to pull at those heartstrings Americans? We still do love those founding fathers. I don't know about the current generation, but still in mine, it was quite, kind of like you shouldn't say anything too bad about them at all. But that was before the age of the 1619 Project and decolonizing history and all that, which I'm not, that's a story for another time. Garrett. First of all, what does it mean to, okay, I'm sorry. Let's backtrack a bit. Say a little bit about yourself and why it is that you're my go-to guy on things about the American Revolution. Why should we care what you say? What do you know? What's happening?
Well, I'm a proud American, Tara. And I live in one of the 13 original states. So I live where the founders shed blood. No, I'm a history major, and
your seed still walks the earth. Yeah,
I'm a history major, and I won an award once. I don't know if I told you that, but anyway. And
about
U.S. history.
Sorry. This is like the fourth time you brought this up. So please do tell me in detail and our audience about the award you won. Well, maybe the second time or third time.
Well, it was just an undergrad award.
Come on now. What was it? Do you have it by you? Can you show it to us?
No, I don't. And it wasn't on 18th century history. But anyway. But hey, you're asking for credentials. What can I say?
That's right. I want to know,
But
papers.
I'm a blogger. So I blogged about a Substack about I guess this debate about the founding fathers that Curtis Yarvin and Chris Rufo, who are these two right-wing activists who are around now, that they're both, well, Rufo is trying to claim the American Revolution, and in particular Sam Adams, as his model.
Okay, so that's where I got Sam Adams from. Okay, that's
yeah.
It's a private joke.
Okay. As his model for the revolt against wokeness that he's involved in, and critical race theory, and all this social liberalism that's kind of become the dominant ideology today. And of course, that's actually kind of bizarre because simultaneously Rufo says that that revolutions are bad and he's a counter-revolutionary, and that the American Revolution should probably be considered a counter-revolution against. Well, I don't know what he thinks it's against exactly. I suppose he would say against the centralization of the British Empire, centralizing power against what had been a more decentralized sort of outpost of an American colony that had been kind of left to its own devices for the previous 100 years, supposedly. That was his theory. Pushback from that came, oddly enough, from someone who's further on the right, Curtis Yarvin, who's a neo-monarchist. And he was saying, yes, the American Revolution was in fact a revolution. It was in some ways a very left-wing, radical democratic revolution. And that's why you shouldn't look to it as a role model if you're a conservative. So I wrote a bit about that. And I used a really interesting document that Yarvin brought up, where John Adams and Samuel Adams, who were two founders who were cousins in Boston, were arguing with each other. And Yarvin said, you may classify John Adams as a reactionary, but not Samuel Adams. And Samuel Adams is the guy who actually really launched the revolution in Boston, and things like the Boston Tea Party and the campaigns against the Stamp Act, and so on. And when you look at the correspondence that Yarvin pointed to, John Adams believed that aristocracies could be legitimate, that often hereditary government was best, that the masses of people, working people, were not fit to run the government anyway, shouldn't be given the opportunity to do that. And Samuel Adams pushed back strongly on that, that there shouldn't be aristocratic dominance and fixed hierarchies. And he even said that there shouldn't be racial hierarchies, which is a pretty radical thing to say for the time. And so, I thought that was an interesting confusion that existed in the right on the part of Chris Rufo, or a mischaracterization that was so wrong that he had to be set straight by someone who's literally an advocate for monarchy. And he understands democracy, and he understands U.S. history more than someone who's claiming to be in the founders' tradition.
Well, that kind of actually makes sense if you think about it. That if you want to undermine something or to go around it, you need to understand it, and also its historical and historiography and his actual historical record, etc. Okay, so basically, Yarvin was saying that it's incoherent. Does it make sense for Rufo to hitch his, I don't know, getting back to basics, returning to our roots, and getting past this woke stuff to Samuel Adams? Is that basically what he was?
Well, it doesn't make sense to claim the far right mantle while simultaneously claiming Samuel Adams.
Okay.
because you can argue that there was a right-wing element to the revolution, but Samuel Adams, and the guy who actually kicked off the revolution, is not it. I mean, that ought to be self-evident in a lot of ways, but
Yeah.
but there's a muddle about that, and to be fair, there's been a muddle for a long time. But when you look at the letters between John and Samuel Adams, the divisions are pretty clear that the thrust of the revolution was radically democratic for its time.
Okay. And this main contention then is about, and this is, of course, this was going on before the actual American Revolution, when they were trying to figure out what kind of government they were going to install or experiment with. Is about suffrage. Yeah,
there's about 10 years between when independence is declared and when the Constitution, the final form of the government, is.
So I was thinking, I don't know if it was Lusordo, it was I think it was an Italian guy who was writing about, he had a book about, I think it was about liberalism or something, and there was a lot in there about, they really struggled over suffrage, about the vote and about political rights.
Oh yes, and as far as
this was, I mean, I'm just saying this was in the air. This discussion was in the air for a bit of
Well, that was a key one, whether or not you would have universal male suffrage, or if it would be limited to property owners. And that was another part of John Adams and Sam Adams' debate.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too off field, because again, I'm not a historian, but I don't know. I'm sure there was a whole lot of confusion and intrigue when you're making the transition, because I'm sure it wasn't just you have monarchy one day and then you have a republic the next day. There was some movement in between the various countries, and what do you do when you're trying to deal with the people who would be, I guess, the I don't know, be the aristocrats or the lords and ladies and whatnot, who would have some political sway with the king, with the monarch, to going towards some sort of representative parliament, for lack of a better word. But anyway, so and now I forgot what I was going to say. So in terms of Rufo and Yarvin, before I forget, I have this little thing. I unfortunately, I guess I'm sure there's a I found a written version of it, but I didn't find a video of it, unfortunately.
No, there is. It was only written, I believe.
Okay, so let me see.
And they've since made up, by the way.
Oh, well, good.
When they had face to face, I don't know. I think they both chickened out or something.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's easier to be tough online than it is face to face. Let me just take off my little face here. Okay.
Rufo decided he was a reactionary at heart, which is which I predicted.
Yeah. Well, and it's also kind of, does he just not like the sound of it, because he doesn't want to, reactionary doesn't sound good. He's just kind of, I don't know. He's like a revolutionary reactionary, perhaps.
Well, yeah, they can't
reactionary revolutionary.
They can't disentangle cultural from economic and political issues. They think that just like they think cultural Marxism is all of Marxism.
Yeah.
And that's not only is it an aspect of Marxism, that supposedly it's the essence of Marxism. So yeah, a lot of the far right conservative identity, unfortunately, is to be counter-revolutionary. Revolution is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Except for the American Revolution, which is a very odd case of doublethink that is widespread. But the interesting thing is that now it is widespread on both the left and the right.
Can you say a bit more about that? Because that kind of gets to why I picked Schrödinger's American Revolution. Can you say a bit more about that? About how it's this odd revolution that people want to argue about how to characterize it, or?
Well, it's an aspect of the new left that then becomes full-blown wokeism. To denigrate the founding fathers because some of them were slave owners, and because their revolution wasn't perfect. And basically, and I don't know, because they lived more than 200 years ago, and and we're coming out of literal monarchy and coming out of literal chattel slavery, which were not things that the founders themselves created. They were conditions that they inherited, from the British Empire, in the 17th century. More than a generation before that. But the founders are held directly responsible for that, even though they were the most progressive force of their time that had any political power. And that's become prevalent on the left now, where it's a sort of purely deconstructionist. And you could say it's a cultural turn to Western Marxism, and kind of an identity politics turn. Where you're wholly focused on the sort of identity inequalities, and you don't look at primarily as class issues and a gradual progression through history, that everything has to have moral perfection. And so it got to the point where a few years ago a Black left-wing historian, I personally think more of a pure Black nationalist than a true Marxist, although he calls himself a Marxist, Gerald Horne. He actually wrote a book called The Counter-Revolution of 1776.
Oh, okay.
And so that's this odd parallel between the far left and the far right, that now both of them want to call 1776 a counter-revolution. And Horne's book is... It's cherry picked in a lot of ways, and it has this premise. It's not always articulated, but it's basically the premise is basically that the English were quickly on their way to abolishing slavery in the 13 colonies anyway, and the founders knew this, and they rebelled against the impending abolition of slavery, and that's an extremely controversial position in history. It's being debated back and forth to this day, including by Black historians. There isn't much evidence for it overall. Just like the British didn't abolish slavery across the whole British Empire until decades later, and then when they did, they used abolishing slavery as a pretext to attack Africans who were still practicing slavery, and supposedly liberating. They used liberal abolitionist imperialism basically as a pretext for more racist activity. So the British were definitely not the progressives, but there are a lot of people on the left who do, and that historical controversy, the party who came in to kind of put their finger on the scale to try and establish it as mainstream history was the New York Times, and their editors, who then seized on that and said, the essence of America is 1619, and that's the real beginning of the American economy and American culture, because that's when the Black slaves came in, and that's all America is about. And then when they had the revolution, that's all that was about.
About maintaining white supremacy.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I understand more about because what prompted me to DM Garrett and be like, hey, this sounds like an interesting episode, was I saw Eddie Liger, I think that's his name. He posted something about with common sense, and he wrote, Thomas Paine wrote this fire at MF, so mother effers, will still say the American Revolution is reactionary. And then Garrett, this is his Twitter handle, says MF's on the ultra right and the ultra left. And so this piqued my interest. I was like, oh, because you know how I love a contradiction. No. No, he's there, but I was like, what's going on here? That's interesting. So now I understand, because I had a bit, so now I understand the dynamics of this. So when you talk about what you would say the ultra left here, or the woke left, or the pomo left, or whatever it is, that the identity politics left, is that their big beef with the Constitution, well, probably that too, but the American Revolution is, of course, that it didn't get rid of slavery. At the end of it, I think at the end of it, at the men with property initially only had the right to vote, and then it got extended and extended and extended.
Right.
So they didn't end slavery, and there was slavery.
It was on state by state basis.
Yeah, there was patriarchy, there was heteronormativity, there weren't trans rights yet. All this stuff, so we really have to, so I think that it went even further. So there's that. So I remember when I started, because you get out of high school, so if you go to a very good high school, and you can stumble upon a more honest history of the United States than you get in your U.S. History class, or your U.S. history class, and when you're 15 at high school. And so there was all the, it was getting out there. But then there became this push that not only do we have to root out racism and sexism and heteronormativity today, but we have to go back in history and get those fuckers as well. Yeah, I mean, you gotta, so there's that. So that's what we would say with the ultra left having having a problem considering the revolution because of all these things that were still the people who would be revered, the founding fathers and the people they were reading and relating to at the time, turned a blind eye, or were weren't on the white supremacist what's that Bell Hooks thing? So the patriarchal
cis het white.
There's that great Bell Hooks thing. It's the capitalist patriarchal heteronormative something. Yeah. So and I'm not saying that those things, aren't there. So, okay. And then on the right, you have the people who thought it went too far. Is that what you're saying? That it should have started between the Republic.
Well, yeah, Curtis Yarvin definitely thought it went too far. And
just because of suffrage or because of other things? What were the other main issues with it? At
the end of the day, I think Rufo is totally in bad faith, and he's in denial. And Yarvin and factually, I think, corrected him quite rightly. Someone who's a little bit more honest, I guess, might be someone like Glenn Beck, who claimed the mantle of Thomas Paine in the Obama administration, the Obama years, and this is sort of the Tea Party movement. And he was like, he liked Thomas Paine because Thomas Paine was a classical liberal in many respects, and he talked about natural law and sort of individual rights and limited government. There's a lot of qualifications you can put on that. By the end of his life, Thomas Paine very much believed in the welfare state. Although Glenn Beck was kind of honest about that. He drew the line between the American-French Revolution.
What would he have called that? Because the welfare state came into that was after World War I, wasn't it? Or II? Or was it?
Yeah. I mean,
when that concept and practice solidified, wasn't it?
Yeah, but Thomas Paine was proposing it, back in 1791.
Okay, what was he calling it though? Just the state, or? Sorry, I mean, it's not that we don't.
Well, I don't know if he had a snappy name for it, like the New Deal or something. But
no, but I mean, I'm just.
But it's in Book 2 of the Rights of Man, where he has a whole progressive taxation scheme for social.
Yeah, who's going to meet these rights, or are they just on paper? Okay. So before we move on, I want to solidify, because I think it's clear, at least it's clear to me, the issues that the people like the 1619 Project and the people who really want to have a race-centered approach to American history rather than, something else, class or an intersectional analysis.
Regarding to the chat, the northern states abolished slavery, though before most of the British Empire did.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, chat. Okay, so I'm just gonna. Can you see this, Garrett, or am I gonna have to Yarvin?
Say again.
Can you see this text, or do I have to Yarvin?
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah. No, I just want to know if
it.
you can see it. I'm concerned about your eye health.
You should with these glasses. Yeah, but, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, so this is just, I'm not going to go through the one thing. This is, so they were billing this as Yarvin. So it was just like the battle in Brussels or something, or I don't know. Christopher Rufo and Curtis Yarvin debate the American Revolution, power, strategy, and more. And they were hyping it, and you get this kind of really serious look. Look at that. Face off. Rufo versus Yarvin. Ooh. And then, and this is just Yarvin's opening statement. If you could read it, please. And once you get to the fourth paragraph, then I'll have to switch our cameras around, okay?
Okay. Yarvin says, quote, "A conservative is someone who thinks our national story has gone off the rails. The windows are closed, but he feels a terrible bump and clatter under his seat and a most untrain-like tilt to the passenger carriage. Everything's in slow motion. He cannot avoid the feeling that he is no longer traveling into the future, but plunging, terribly, into some unfathomable ravine. If you are conservative, whether you have asked yourself this specific question or not, you must have some idea of A, when our country went off the rails, B, how far we are from those rails, and C, what kind of political force would be required to get us back on track. Most conservatives' instinctive answer is probably A, maybe 1963 or so, B, not far, and C, a conventional railway crane, a Republican president, House and Senate, and a Supreme Court majority. No rhinos or squishes, please. With this gear and good engineering team, free from grifters, cowards, climbers, neocons, etc., we can hoist the locomotive back on track, make Washington work for America again, and keep traveling aboard our real destiny."
Can you still see it, or?
Yeah. You
okay.
Want the
please,
last paragraph?
go ahead. Yes, please.
Yarvin says, "I am not a conservative. I am a radical monarchist. I believe there are no rails and never were any. America has no manifest destiny. Her constitution was not divinely inspired. No special providence was involved in her founding. Nor has she discovered any unique principle of human governance, nor can any theory of historical determinism, whether liberal, Marxist, or libertarian, explain, predict, or guarantee her future, which, like all future history, is a contingent and unwritten blank page in the hands of men only." He is a good writer, you have to admit.
He is, and he probably means men only. Okay, so let's dig into this, okay? Because I some of this I agree with. Yeah, like the last paragraph. I mean, I think I'm obviously I would identify as a historical materialist, but not a determinant. That's not the same as determinism, I don't think. So what would you say to what would be your response to this in terms of the overall theme, in terms of the American Revolution?
Well,
and how whether or not we should give a crap about what's coming.
I'm a type of. I think dialectical materialism is a type of soft historical determinism. It's not absolute historical determinism, but the material, pre-existing material factors are something that you have to cope with. Yeah, and they do put certain limits. as Marx said, men make their own history, but they don't make it exactly as they please. Providence. So I don't know. Is that a form of providence? Maybe. I mean, and Engels, he did sympathize with a Christian philosophy in some respects. That he thought that it did approximate a sort of unscientific version, imprecise metaphorical version of the progress of civilization. And I think that there is a historical progress of civilization.
Yeah. But I think, would you agree with his kind of potted definition of what you are if you're conservative? So you have this idea that the country's gone off the rails, but there could be how far off do you think it is, and what do we need to do to get it back, quote unquote, back on track? Would you agree with that potted definition of conservative in general?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. And I think what he's probably saying is most people would say, like most conservatives, at least that I know, just kind of like again, like something went off maybe after the 60s or the 70s or who knows when. We have to get back to basics, back to the Constitution, back to quote unquote American values and this kind of, self-reliance and that can be not too much oligarchy, not too much state, whatever. So I think that's probably the thing. I would also agree, but
conservatism is a broad category.
Yeah, well,
and there's a problem with conflating different types of conservatives, and there is a long time problem of conflating Republican conservatism with actual monarchism, which I think in some way does go back to Edmund Burke in the 18th century.
Okay, so that's a segue, because I was going to ask you, because again, because I think there's political conservatism and then there's kind of cultural conservatism, and of course those things can overlap, but they can, so it's like some people don't like seeing, public displays of affection, but they could be like all for, the dictatorship of the proletariat, and then you could have it the other way, also. The other way around, and kind of some of these tech bro libertarian types. So it might be more, I don't know. Anyway, but we're stuck with the terms that we have, and so we'll just use those. But it's kind of interesting because he says, I'm not a conservative, I'm a radical monarchist. So he's basically saying that there's no need to, I think I haven't looked at all of this, but I think if I remember his thing is that, we don't need to be so tied into this. I mean, we can do what we want to do basically. And so I guess he would say he's a radical monarchist because he doesn't want to like go back to, or maybe he does, like a previous, to the monarchy, he wants a new monarchy. He wants a radical monarchy.
Right.
So, okay, but fair enough. So so I guess when someone, we'll just call him a conservative, but when Yarvin, his beef, if you could sum up, because I know that you get in this in your article, Yarvin's beef with the revolution would be what? His main beef? Did it happen at all, or?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, was it necessary? It was an unnecessary revolution.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a pure idealist, I guess, and he doesn't think that political liberalization and economic liberalization was an important stage to unleash the forces of production and get us the technology and development that we currently have. Or maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he just would be happy with like the same massive level of child mortality we had in the 18th century and horse and buggies, and I don't think he really
because he'd be in the cathedral.
Would commit to that, but
he'd be outside the cathedral. He'd be in the cathedral.
He'd be inside the cathedral. Yeah, he just doesn't like the current cathedral.
So anyway, yes. Okay, so two things. What do you want to talk about first? We want to talk about the Great Debate in terms of the argument that I can't see it, but is this? I think this book came out 10 years ago, maybe. And someone wrote The Great Debate, and it says Edmund Burke, Thomas Paine, and the Birth of Right and Left. So, which is kind of interesting because I think, at least, I never really knew, I never really thought about, well, where do these terms come from, the right and the left, and have the boundary lines, how much have they shifted back and forth over the years? And I'm fairly sure that I heard somebody say, or I read somewhere, that these aren't terms that Marx or Engels, etc., so the founding poobahs of Marxism, they didn't talk in terms of left and right, but these guys, this particular author wants to attach it to the division or the difference between Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine in the 1700s. And can you say a bit about that and what you think about this guy's argument?
Yeah, I mean, I referred you to this, but I'm actually kind of critical of it. But I think it's relevant.
No, please. I gathered that when I saw who the guy was.
Yeah. But I mean, it is the framing that is pretty standard in political science. Burke was supposed to be the first conservative, and Paine
the first liberal.
Well, probably I guess the first socialist. So yeah, that's the framing, and the occasion for the framing is the French Revolution, because Burke supported the American Revolution from Britain. He was a British parliamentarian, and he said we should just let these colonies go. They know how to take care of themselves, and they just want the rights of Englishmen, and you're not giving it to them. If we can't give them representation here, then we shouldn't be taxing them and have a direct relationship with them. And Paine and Burke were actually friends for a while in the immediate.
Oh, really?
After.
Okay.
Yeah.
Spill the tea, Garrett.
What?
Spill the tea. Well,
yeah, I actually only realized that recently, that Paine actually stayed at Burke's house for a while in the 1780s when he would visit France and visit England. But they had a massive falling out over the French Revolution.
Okay. As people do. I mean, who hasn't?
Well,
I've lost friends over that debate.
Well, most of the founding fathers were split on it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Ooh, good.
That's part of that's like a big aspect of this. And as I said, going back to the John Adams, Sam Adams thing, and it was really the beginning of the party system, the two-party system in the U.S., and just a really cutthroat, competition, the electoral competition, ultimately between Adams and Jefferson in 1800, and that included Hamilton on Adams's side, on the Federalist side, on the more reactionary side. And
so the Federalists are reactionary. Or if you had to put them on, if you have to use that kind of blunt instrument, reactionary, not reactionary,
well,
you would say the Federalist camp would have to be put in that box?
They were politically reactionary by the standards of the 18th century. It's really complicated, of course, because of slavery, and it's also really complicated as far as central banking goes, because the Federalists and the pro-British side,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they were pro-central banking and they were anti-slavery. I think there were geopolitical reasons for this, actually, if you want to get into it. And we probably should go into it because geopolitics plays a much bigger role in this stuff than I think people generally recognize. That's my materialist analysis.
Yeah, if you think it fits here, please do. I want to hear it. I don't know about this part.
Yeah, well, we've already got like France into the mix, so which then
and also before we move on,
Wars.
but before we move on from France, I don't think you really said, or at least I missed it. So they had a falling out. So Burke and Paine had a personal falling out over the French Revolution.
Right.
What was that? That it went too far, or
well, that was
something specific.
That was the overthrowing of the monarchy.
Okay.
And prosecuting the monarch, the monarch as a traitor. Right. Although the argument began before that, but the argument didn't actually begin over that. It began simply over whether or not France should become a republic, that they should go from being an absolute monarchy to being a republic. And Burke was an advocate for constitutional monarchy.
And so a constitutional monarchy is one where there's some it's codified what the sovereign can and cannot do, but they still have like they're the head honcho, whereas a republic would be a parliament.
Well, yes, and a president who's elected. An executive who's elected
but not necessarily elected from the population, but from a certain swath of the population. Was another argument, like who gets to vote or decide who are the representatives.
I mean, when I say constitutional monarch, there's actually some debate about the terms, in the sense that I don't know if Paine would agree that there's such a thing as a constitutional monarch, because he was anti-monarchist. He was a Republican right down the road. And I think he had a point there, in that I don't know if Burke really accepted. Well, for one thing, I don't think England at that time had a strong constitution. And maybe he doesn't now.
It doesn't have a constitution.
Right. It doesn't have a written constitution.
I mean, not like a... No.
Yeah. So
it has law and all that.
You could argue that's a bad faith argument, but that was the argument that Burke and the conservatives made.
Keith is on fire tonight. Burke would not care for Luigi. No,
no, he wouldn't.
But would Thomas Paine, or that be taking it too far, baby? Keith is
he wouldn't lose a lot of sleep. He wouldn't lose a lot of sleep over it, even though Paine himself was threatened in the Reign of Terror later on, because he wasn't left enough. He wasn't radical enough, and he wanted the king overthrown, but he didn't want to execute him. But both Paine and Thomas Jefferson said the Reign of Terror was understandable, and it wasn't a deal breaker for the legitimacy of the French Revolution.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have to throw the baby out with the guillotine. And, I mean, some of them probably, yeah. Okay. So, constitutional monarchy. So that was the thing. And so apparently quite passionate about it. But I guess it's hard. It's easy for us to say now, when we're at least, we're in an in-between time, but if I try to put myself in their position, that would be something that a friendship could have a falling out over. Whether or not you're for a republic, full-throated, or quote unquote constitutional monarchy. And he wasn't having it. He didn't really, apparently Paine didn't think that's just kind of like, it's still monarchy. Right. And and compared to other monarchs of the day, George III, the British system was liberal, but Paine still thought it was tyrannical compared to a republic. Yeah. So on that note, so we know that probably people who so Thomas Paine comes up a lot, of course, in this period, and I think it's common. I think it's consensus, at least in the historical, at least, people for historians of this age, or just kind of dabblers, that he kind of has an outsized influence, or he stands out the most during these times through his writings and his radical ideas, that all the people that were involved in the American Revolution and figuring out the government afterwards were, Paine was, his material was widely read and discussed. Yeah, and he was alive at the time. So I guess he was also kind of hanging out with these people, probably, having a nice cognac or something. But
you hung out with everybody.
Yeah, so he was popular. Yeah, so so there's one quote. Yeah, so he had a revolutionary vision. So again, as academic fields, and not just academic fields, but as humans, we're wont to do, we things are kind of on the back burner for a while. Then every once in a while they flare up again. About what to be, what, like when the 1619 project came up and all this stuff came out again about having to revisit or reinforce or talk about the proper way, or the way to understand and teach or revere or not, or be critical or not of the U.S. history. So what do I want to say? There's this quote that I think is quite kind of captures this terms of Paine as a revolutionary, and him having, a revolutionary vision, obviously that quite surpassed constitutional monarchies, and you could say also extended past what we would think of, what most people would think of a republics in that time. So do you want me to read this quote from Thomas Paine before you respond to it, or should I read the quote and then you respond to it?
I think you should read it.
Very good. Okay, so let me get my official thing here going on. I know I can't do a Thomas Paine thing. We have in our power to begin the world over again. Let the names of Whig and Tory be extinct, and let none other be heard among us than those of good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind and of the free and independent states of America. Thomas Paine, Common Sense, 1775.
Yeah, so I think the significance of this quote is that, well, first of all, this is Common Sense. So this is his most widely read work. And this is the work that kicks off the War of Independence. There had been revolutionary activity before that, but this is the text that unifies the colonies, that they will declare independence and separate from the British Empire. So this is really where it all starts, officially. The Declaration of Independence makes it official the following year. But it
starts with this pamphlet, you would say.
Yeah, this was the sales pitch for the Declaration of Independence, to get the majority of the country in line with that. And it's interesting that he has a universalist vision. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. And it's also interesting. Well, he cements it by talking about the rights of mankind. And this is something that I think conservatives need to chew on. The fact that there is this, not purely a nationalist vision, that the nationalism is simultaneously tied up, with this humanism and with this universalism. Now, the irony of it at the same time, and is a kind of conservative doublethink that comes up again and again, is that Ronald Reagan really liked that first part and quoted it a couple of times. He quoted at his speech the first time he was nominated for president at the Republican National Convention. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. And it's very radical. It's in many ways proto-Marxist. As conservatives define it. Now, I don't know if that's the correct way to frame it. That's the way a conservative would frame it. it goes back, not only further than Marx, it probably goes back to Christianity or to any great religion that says, I bring the good news to all mankind, And
doesn't Catholic doesn't the word Catholic like originally like everybody universal. Or everybody's welcome or something?
Universal, yeah.
Universal church, yeah.
But that's an interesting thing. I think when Reagan cited, it's an instance, I think, of co-opting liberal republicanism into liberal imperialism. Because Reagan was trying to sort of say, we are going to take the world back from the communists. And we're going to take it back from the socialists and from all the anti-capitalist forces. But so the common thread there is liberalism, but and I guess you could say internationalism. But as I said, with Paine, it's a Republican internationalism, and with Reagan, it was just flat out kind of American imperialism. But Paine's vision is progressive internationalist. It could fairly be called proto-Marxist. That's kind of what Curtis Yarvin was calling it, and I think he was correct.
So basically, he was like, "Yo, man, you do not want to be you don't want to be revering Thomas Paine,
right? Or Samuel Adams, or
Ixnay on the Paine, yeah."
And those people who are on the same wing of the left wing of the revolution, the American Revolution.
Okay, but can I just I want to put a pin in that for a minute because his name's escaping me, but the guy who does Unregistered,
Thaddeus Russell.
Yeah, Thaddeus Russell, because I was thinking he had one of those old-timey names, and I
met him once.
I was like, Benjamin Franklin, I know. But I remember I was watching something of one of his shows, and I think he referred to, was it Kagan, the guy? There's this neoconservative guy or neocon guy who wrote a book about the history, and it was like imperialist from the beginning, or he had some sort of title on that. And his argument was that from the beginning, it's not that we were isolationists and only focused on this and then later on the imperialism came. That from the beginning it was baked into the cake, and uses things I think like Thomas Jefferson. Starting the Marines, and what do you have Marines for? You don't have Marines to protect the homeland. You have Marines to go off someplace else. In this idea, if you're a city on the hill, and this type of stuff, that just like the church or most churches, we'll use Christianity. It's expansionary, like anybody can come, and there's a thin line between that and like everybody should come. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. That other interpretation that and could that be connected to him as well?
Thaddeus Russell is an interesting guy. I think I would characterize him as kind of an anarcho-capitalist.
I think he'd say he's a libertarian, but he grew up very lefty with very left kind of socialist parents. But I think he would say he's a libertarian, but he's also very anti-war. So he's anti-imperial.
Yeah, well, as most anarcho-capitalists are.
Okay.
Because war is a statist enterprise. But I think definitely on that position and on that point, I think that's kind of an anarchistic position to say.
Well, there is the manifest destiny. There is this kind of. You could universalize how, but through what means? I mean, that he didn't get into, right?
Yeah, it's factual. Well, it's factually true. It's factually true that the U.S. was expansionist, obviously, and manifest destiny. But at the same time, some of this you have to understand geopolitically. Actually, it's like it'd be one thing if the U.S. invented, black chattel slavery, but they didn't. They inherited that from the British. And the whole like imperial system on the Atlantic and on North America isn't something that the founders invented. It's something that they had to.
Well, they certainly didn't not participate in it.
Yeah, but what other choice do they have besides participating in it? Is the question.
Sorry?
What would you have done that would have improved the situation? I think it's very anarchistic to never ever put yourself in the position of an authority.
No, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
That you could make that as a rationalization for anything that's ever happened ever, and we can look at it and it'd be like if we wanted to really get into that, and I'm not have the capacity to do that because again I'm not a historian.
Right.
Is to look at a particular thing. So whether it be the Philippines or whether it be the Mexican-American Wars, or whether it be the why Thomas Jefferson, the debate about why he found the Marines and sent them out to do what they did. It would have to look, I'd have to know more what was going on there to understand. I mean, I totally agree with you that it wasn't just that they were like, that was like a defer they're buying, like, we're out to conquer and take whatever we can, whenever we can, that type of thing. At that point, but I just wanted to put that out there because this is an open debate, isn't it? About how American is American imperialism. Was it from the beginning, or was it something that just kind of as forces and production relations, as the opportunities and the geopolitical arrangements changed and people act opportunistically based on their own interests as they see them at the time. I mean,
to some extent, but it's like the U.S. or Jefferson when he was president. He didn't seek out colonies overseas. That's one thing which he didn't expand. And
no need to at that point.
Yeah, I mean, now you say they colonized in the U.S. Yeah, absolutely. But what would have happened if they didn't?
No, but
I guess colonized it.
I guess no. I mean, if you don't want to, if you can't answer the question or you don't want to, that's fine. What all I'm saying is is that in terms of this quote, you have this in terms of obviously there's the universalism of it. We can begin the world over again. All this. So I'm just saying is that this isn't contradictory to how things played out. If you want to look at the imperial aspect that developed, that's all I'm saying. That is that contradictory. So is what happened we'll just use the case of the Philippines as an example, unless you want to use a different one. Does that contradict this sentiment, or is it? Or not?
I think it contradicts Paine's overall perspective. Yeah, I said that Reagan took Paine out of context. So what am I trying to say here? Well,
I could rephrase it another way, and we can just move on.
Say that it's fair in the sense that I think Paine may have been excessively internationalist in some ways, but because he seemed to believe that the U.S. should get involved in the war to defend France, and that was a major geopolitical thing and political thing in the U.S. That was the argument that the conservatives made, that if you supported Republican France in any way, then you would be drawn into the war between Britain and France. And we can't afford to get drawn into that war because this country barely exists yet. It's less than 20 years old, and we don't know if we can keep it together here. And we don't know that the French are going to win. And I think that a lot of the problems in the French Revolution stemmed from France being so isolated. And you could argue that, if the Americans had backed them up, there might not have been a reign of terror in France that was that bad. But that's all counterfactual. It's hard to prove one way or the other.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I probably didn't, I because it just popped into my head. I just because again, it goes with this theme of kind of Schrödinger's American Revolution, the various critiques of it from whether it be from the right or the left that can overlap in terms of how much of it should be, kind of dispatched with, or just a nice little, chapter of history. We don't have to see ourselves in constant relationship to it. Is with Thaddeus Russell. Again, if I remember, I'm trying to think, because I can't remember the exchange I was having with him, but he said something kind of like mic drop about the founding fathers, whatever. And I just wrote a tweet like, oh, is that how you start your American history courses? He's like, no, that's how I end them. And it was basically like the idea that you shouldn't be venerating these people. You shouldn't be, it's like, yeah, the Bill of Rights is good. It's not that there isn't, to throw it all out, but it's like everything that you want to have concerns with didn't happen after these guys. It was baked in the cake with them. So they were imperialists, they were this, they were that, they were, the whatever. So he kind of agrees with Kagan, even though he doesn't support the neoconservative project, he basically was agreeing with him that, yeah, that was baked in the cake from the beginning. And that would be definitely a way of characterizing the American Revolution in a kind of reactionary, not so equality, fraternity, liberty type of way. It was why I wanted to bring it up. But again, I can't get into the specifics because I'm not a U.S. historian. So right. I guess in terms of a general thing, without getting into weeds,
you should ask him what he thinks about the 1619 project. You should ask him.
Sorry, what?
You should ask him what he thinks of the 1619 project and the Revolution of 1776.
Not much, I don't think. No.
It sounds like he has the same perspective.
Yeah. Well, but he's not talking.
That seems to be the same. It seems to be the same point.
But his thing is he's not focused on race, on white supremacy or racism. He's focused on a variety of other things. How they weren't that egalitarian, they weren't that Republican, they weren't that this, they weren't that. And I mean, I didn't sign up to take his history course, so we'll have to put a pin in that because we'll have to get back into it. But from what I gather from it, I don't think you can dismiss him the way you can dismiss the 1619 project, unless you want to say that Kagan and that Kagan's argument in his books and the 1619 project are making the same argument. I don't think they are, because of course one thinks it's fine and dandy and one doesn't. But
who's Kagan again?
Let me see if I. Yeah, but before that, because I don't want to take. I'll try to find that while we move on from our tangent. I wanted to ask you in terms of this quote from Paine and that common sense, as you said, is kind of like was like was the Declaration of Independence before the Declaration of Independence that kind of solidified the kind of, I guess, the ideology or the impetus, the spirit behind it with the people who are participating in it. Is that fair enough to say? And the head honchos of the names that we all know of.
I think the majority of people who fought in the revolution, this is what they believed in, because the common sense was understood to be the manifesto.
Okay, there you go.
Really the first manifesto of American independence, even before the Declaration of Independence.
Okay, so you could say this was the Declaration, the manifesto for American independence. I guess you could say the political manifesto for American independence. But I wanted to ask you, so in terms of this vision of a world over again, we can make a world over again. Do you think it was even at that point realistic, or how did this play out? Did it alienate more moderate revolutionaries like, I guess, Samuel Adams? This type of talk. John Adams.
And the answer is yes, it did.
Sam Adams is the beer. That's why I keep on wanting to say Sam.
John Adams did not like Thomas Paine, but he considered Paine to be dangerous and potentially an anarchist. I don't think he was, but that's kind of how John Adams looked at him. Simultaneously, he admitted that he was the most influential writer of the age. Later on, when when Paine started calling the revolutionary era the age of reason, Adams sort of decrying, things like the French Revolution, said, no, it's just the age of pain, as a little pun.
Okay. All right. So, but I guess it would but in the end, it was kind of obviously they would have to, there was a lot of politicking going around. And would you say it would be fair to, in the context of the times, to look at after the Constitution was settled, could this qualify as a world made over again? Or was it still the aspiration? Because we hear that all the time in the States, that we mess up, but we're still trying to live up to the ideals that were set out in our by the founding fathers and in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, even though we fall short.
Are you saying that Paine's vision has come true, that America is?
No. Well, no, what I would say is that in that time period, because the question was it kind of, just kind of, being bombastic and trying to raise the troops, like, yeah, we can make the world again. We can clean the slate and decide what we want.
Well, the answer is always is yes and no.
Yes.
The answer is always,
you got to get people, you got to get the juices going,
Yeah. I mean,
it can't be like, we're going to do this and we're going to risk it. And some of you are going to die and it's going to be really nasty. And maybe we'll end up with a constitutional monarchy. I mean, you can't. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, you shoot for the moon and fall along the stars, that kind of thing. But I mean, it definitely was true in the sense that the American Republic stood, and the American Republic became a model all over the world, even to some extent to communist countries. They just thought they were going beyond it. But, the Marxist vision is not to, go before it. It's still understood to be a progressive revolution, even though it's a bourgeois revolution, in terms of crushing or challenging monarchy and feudalism. And it's the answer is no, in the aspect that the French Revolution failed.
All right. So back to what we were talking. Kagan, I can share my screen. I found that little guy. I don't know. Maybe he's probably not little. I don't know. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen. Share screen. Dangerous Nation. There we go. Share. So can you see this, Garrett? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So here it is. So this is Robert Kagan, best-selling author of Paradise and Power, and it's A Dangerous Nation. The Dangerous Nation, Americans' Foreign Policy from its earliest days to the dawning of the 20th century. And apparently it's part of his Dangerous Nation trilogy. And I'll just read the little synopsis here from Amazon because I haven't read this book. Most Americans believe the United States has been an isolationist power until the 20th century. This is wrong. In a riveting and brilliantly revisionist work of history, Robert Kagan, best-selling author of Paradise and Power, shows how Americans have, in fact, steadily been increasing their global power and influence from the beginning. Driven by commercial, territorial, and idealistic ambitions, the United States has always perceived itself and been seen by other nations as an international force. This book is of great importance to our understanding of our nation's history and its role in the global community. So that's that guy. Anyway, Foreign Affairs. Brilliant and original, a tour de force of historical writing that should change the way people view the country's past. So that is that guy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I think it's misleading in the sense that danger is relative. It's like, was the U.S. the most imperialist country in the 18th and 19th century? No, it wasn't even the most imperialist English-speaking country. So
it got there eventually, though, when you say.
Yeah.
And then we be conservative,
but
that's when it got off the rails. It got too imperialist. It got off the rails, and we got to come back to the Thomas Paine of it all. And is that the?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on if you see it.
I'm a bit worried here that you're becoming an imperialist apologist, Garrett, and which I'm shocked to find. I'm a bit shocked about. Or you're a pragmatic imperialist.
I think that you're kind of reading. I think that point of view kind of reads history backwards. I just yeah, and it's an unrealistic like anarchist.
Okay, well, your first instinct is that you are not buying his revisionist history, although you haven't read it and I haven't read it, so we can't say too much. But that might be something interesting to do, to go over that and see what's in that book. Okay, but moving on, unless you want to say something before we move on to the next.
Well, it seems to be creating an all or nothing dynamic that ultimately, serves imperialism. That either this needs to be the dominant, or either the U.S. government needs to be abolished, or we need to be a unilateral global empire, and there's no in between.
Okay, who's saying it should be abolished? I mean, the monarchists, I guess, the radical monarchists, and the 1619 people, or
well, the 1619 people, seem to have an anti-nationalist position towards the U.S.
Okay.
I mean,
so what
and
is
you're
their vision?
sort of equating the American nation with the American empire.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Anyway, let's see. So, where's the next part? Oh, right. So there's another important quote from Paine in terms of this idea if the revolution was reactionary or not, or good or not, or to sanctified in its retelling. Is this the second one? Let's see. So this is from The Rights of Man, Part 2, 1791. When in countries that we call civilized, we see age going to the workhouse and youth to the gallows, something must be wrong in the system of government.
Yeah, and that's where Paine basically proposes a prototype for the welfare state. When he is obviously not exactly an anti-capitalist, and he's supported this capitalist revolution, and he supports most of the economic arguments against the monarchy, and excessive regulation for imperialist purposes of an economy. But he also realizes that there's worsening inequality. Although he mainly has Britain in mind when he writes this, because he was born in Britain, and because English-speaking Americans were doing a lot better for the most part, because they had so much more land, and commerce than the British did. But he was arguing for old age pensions, for publicly funded education, and for welfare payments, essentially, in the Rights of Man, which would be funded by progressive taxation.
Okay, and how was that received? Do you know, in that time period?
It was received.
Political movers and shakers.
It was not. Well, the book on the whole was well received at first. After the Reign of Terror, this book was essentially an argument in favor of the French Revolution.
Okay.
So Paine's reputation was partly wounded. It kind of rose and fell with the reputation of the French Revolution. But I would say it was fairly well received in the sense that this entire book was well received as being a progressive classic, which is agreed to have helped inform the development of the welfare state.
Okay, but the welfare state isn't okay. So that I don't know if I'm like we'll put a pin in that, because I know that a lot of there's discussion that the welfare state is actually counter-revolutionary, because it makes the proletariat and the people depend on the state rather than which is kind of that benefits or as allows the state to paper over, to cover over some of the excesses of capitalism, which is going to make it take longer to make the shift. But that might be a separate topic. I wanted to ask, so
it wasn't counter-revolutionary in 1791.
No. But do you know what I'm talking about? You know the argument.
Oh yes, of course.
My understanding is that like communists and socialists in the before was it before when that they were quite critical of the New Deal, yeah, for these types of reasons. But I don't know.
The 1930s and 40s Communist Party most definitely was not.
Okay. Well, I heard something.
I mean, they said it should go farther, but when they weren't against Social Security or the National Labor Relations Board, no, absolutely not.
Okay, well, I've heard varying things on that. That it might have been the idea that I had heard that there was division in that, and that it was the same thing as going along with there was divisions in terms of nationalism in the World War I and World War II within the socialist and communist parties, and there was one in terms of what was going on with the New Deal to save capitalism.
Well, it depends on the context. It really depends on the context, because as you have
let's
look at the context of where you're coming from.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that, because that's a bit of a different issue, and I'll have to find out now where I heard that from, because I remember the first time I heard that I thought, because it never occurred to me to see the New Deal as problematic in that sense. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, okay, well, I could see if you're looking at it in terms of if the goal is to embolden and strengthen the working class to be able to eventually to take, to push out the dictatorship, the bourgeoisie. If you have the state that's that the welfare state becomes an obstacle to doing that. I can understand, but I haven't really totally fleshed it out. But when I thought about that, okay, then that makes sense to me.
I think you have to demonstrate to the public that it's even possible to regulate the market, and it's even possible to have like constructive collective institutional action that changes the society, if that hasn't happened before. And the Communist Party, the American Communist Party, and the global movement led by the USSR, it went through various positions on this. But it's complicated, because in the early 1930s, there was an opposition to liberalism. There was and social democracy, even, because they thought that there was potential for a global revolution, and they thought that there was no hope of peeling the liberals away from the fascists. But kind of FDR kind of disproved that, and it got to the point with the Communist Party where the communists liked Roosevelt so much that in the 1940s they went halfway to dissolving their party to try and merge with the Democratic Party. Well, that sort of backfired totally, because the Democratic Party betrayed them and participated in the Red Scare. So it's complicated.
What are you gonna do? I'm sorry, it's not funny to be part of, yeah, but yeah, it's just a Democratic Party. All right, I just want to say, I see that we have like 139 comments, and I'm on my own back here. So if I pay attention to the comments, then I can't pay attention to Garrett. But at some point, we're going to wrap this up, and then we will quickly go through the comments. Hopefully, Garrett has time to go through some of those with me as well. But I want to make sure that we at least touch upon the points that we discussed touching upon before we started. Okay, so in terms of this quote, Garrett, and Garrett's position obviously is that he's quite critical of both the those on the left, or who it's so difficult these days, those who position themselves on the left, whatever that is, and the right, who are critical, overly critical about the American Revolution and its significance and the things that followed there, wanting to be for maybe different reasons, being too quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater, either for conservative reasons or for concerns about wanting to focus on slavery centered, white supremacy and this type of thing. So that's why Garrett is the good guy to have on this, and he's a good guy anyway, and he's has a history degree. So I do not. But I have watched quite a few documentaries. Anyway, different story. I have read a lot, but not of history, unfortunately. Oh, sorry. Anyway, I'm rambling on. Garrett. So these ideas. So in terms of his critique of, he seems to be, this is a critique of the structured, systematic inequality, we could say. And he's espousing a belief that the government's also responsible for addressing poverty and looking at putting some guardrails on labor exploitation. So in what way did this kind of push beyond the boundaries of what the founders were comfortable with in this time period?
This was let's just say this was a seed which was planted.
That
was not ready. That was not yet ready to grow to fruition.
Yeah. That's right. It's just okay. I like that. That's a good metaphor.
But the seed was there, and the seed was being fertilized because the American tradition was established. There was continuity. That the later reformers and socialists very explicitly celebrated Thomas Paine.
Okay. And so again, there's people who want to force team, maybe, or want to co-op people for their to bring to either just to reference them or to to build upon it, because we even have today, you still have the Republicans, like Reagan, like they make a lot of how Abraham Lincoln was a Republican Party president, as and it's if there's like an unchanging continuity between the
definitely not a monarchist, regardless of what
of the anyway, so would you say that this? So I'm guessing that, like you said, you can make. It seems quite clear to me that why you could make the argument where this was kind of like a proto-socialism, or like the kind of maybe the preamble to what Marx developed and what later people who call themselves socialists of one stripe or another developed in thought and tried to in practice. But do the libertarians also use Paine as well as a kind of can you also, is there anything in Paine that could bolster a libertarian vision of justice or of society or the government, I guess I should say?
There is, and that's the way that he's most often used these days. For better or for worse. As he said, it didn't used to be that way in the kind of pre-woke era, when the American Revolution in general was kind of celebrated by socialists,
Mm.
but and Paine in particular.
Mm.
But libertarians, I think they frequently quote the first chapter of Common Sense, where Paine says that society and government are two different things, and that government is at best a necessary evil. On the other hand,
that sounds libertarian.
Yeah. On the other hand, he goes on to talk about why free people establish governments, and that there's power in numbers, and that great things are only accomplished through collectivism, accepting some degree of collectivism, and basically supporting the social contract theory of John Locke. So he does start with a liberal premise, which, looking back, is not really supported by anthropology. That we're all sort of isolated individuals at the beginning of our lives.
Robinson Crusoe thing, yeah.
Yeah, or even just the fact that it takes human beings 20 years to mature, and they're dependent on their families up until that time, and like we're an especially kind of non-isolated species, if you ask me. And so there's that libertarian message at the beginning of Common Sense that is quickly clarified by the fact that he is calling for collective action against the British. And he's not calling he's explicitly calling for United States of America. And that's an important thing to remember when you talk about federalism and, these whole sorts of debates that actually led to the American Civil War, where it was premised that the states pre-existed the Union and the states created the Union. But there was no independence before the concept of the United States of America. Like, there are no states. There are literally no states without the Union of States. The states didn't secede from the British Empire individually. They seceded collectively. So Paine is sort of advocating for a degree of individualism, and maybe I shouldn't even say individualism, because ism, it implies an ideology. He's advocating for individuality, and you can leave a situation and you can leave a social contract if the social contract progresses to a certain point of tyranny where it's completely destructive. And obviously that's an element of seceding from the British Empire. But overall, he's also calling for the collectivism of the United States. Yeah.
A polity.
Yes. And so that is the dialectic of Common Sense.
Oh, there you go, Garrett. That's why I pay you the big honorarium. Someday, inshallah. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so there was one other thing.
And also that he advocated for a central bank. The first central bank of the U.S. was the Bank of North America. So the Ron Paul people wouldn't like that too much.
So he was a Rothschild then. That's his.
Yeah.
Thomas Paine. Yeah.
Thomas Paine-Burke.
Paine-Burke, yeah. Oh gosh. Laugh or cry. Okay, anyway, I'm often told that online, you're trying to have a conversation, or you start, even if you get some good back and forth going on, and someone will come back and be like, it's just you're like,
the JK.
Yeah, I'm like, whatever, yo. Anyway. So let's see. Okay, so the next quote that was emblematic of the period in Paine's significance. Let's see, hopefully I have this here. Oh, voila. Would you like to read this from Agrarian Justice?
Sure. If we examine the case minutely, it will be found that the accumulation of personal property is in many instances the effect of paying too little for the labor that produced it, the consequence of which is that the working hand perishes in old age and that the employer abounds in affluence.
What? Okay, no, sorry. Go ahead. And why is this an important Paine quote for you?
Well, he's definitely acknowledging. He's definitely acknowledging, labor exploitation. Sort of adds to the Curtis Yarvin point that there are a bunch of proto-Marxists in that American Revolution that conservatives should stay away from.
Yeah. It didn't start with that. How are they smearing Marx now? That drunk, smelly, philandering German expat in UK. Oh no. Go ahead.
Yeah. Never worked a day in his life.
Yeah. All that stuff. It's like he cheated on his wife. I don't know. Like, okay. Yeah.
I believe he shaved later on after that photo. With the big beard. He didn't always.
They got him on a bad day. I mean, you got. Come on. All right. So yeah. I mean, obviously. I mean, you don't. This certainly is, and what's the word they like to use? Anticipating. He's definitely anticipating the critique of political economy that comes later. I know that Marx worked a lot with Ricardo, and I mean, like they're working like not like side by side, but with Ricardo and with Smith,
right?
But did he talk about, and I knew that obviously he was aware of what was going on in the States, and his journalism wrote quite a bit about that, but did he talk about, I don't remember how much he brought up Paine in his work?
Not a good deal, because...
Did he plagiarize? No.
Well, by that point, there are probably a lot of French socialists who have gone further with it. A lot further with it than Paine had. But Marx praised the American Revolution in general, and so did Lenin and Mao. So, but as I said, the radical socialist movement in Europe and Britain was very much celebratory of Tom Paine. They literally used to celebrate his birthday. And the socialist societies were often called Tom Paine societies.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I remember that now. I remember hearing Thomas Paine societies. Okay. Yeah. And that was before my consciousness was awoken. So I think I probably just thought it was kind of like Daughters of the American Revolution or something.
Right.
Just kind of like, or those other kinds of societies and whatnot.
But I would say that, Marx would certainly criticize him for not going beyond the welfare state, even at the level of theory. But I think he would identify with Paine because, he wasn't just a Fabian. He wasn't an elitist socialist. I don't believe. I think he believed in mass movements of people. And, the whole point of common sense was to create a mass movement of people in the American Revolution.
So what you're trying to say is that he was a bit of a populist?
Yes, he was a bit of a populist.
I'm quick.
Yes. And he's not someone who decried, the French Revolution in any way.
Yeah. So he didn't. He wouldn't have failed. He would have been the kind of these guys when the question today, like, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Iraq?
Right.
If he was on like Pierce Morgan right after when the terror started in the French Revolution, and he was asked, "Do you condemn the French Revolution?" Paine would have been like, He wouldn't come out with a hard no or a hard yes.
Yeah.
That would be a good skit. I'm not a skit writer though, but just kind of a kind of historian thing. Maybe I'm a nerd, like, they kind of set that up. So instead of in the context of the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, we have it like, we make it like it's a talk show after, when the French Revolution takes a turn. Get these people on there for their comment.
Yeah,
look at the guillotine, look at it. Why can't you just condemn it? Why can't you just condemn it?
Yeah, I'm afraid that there's unfortunately still many controversies around the French Revolution than there ought to be. Okay. Especially with after that Marie Antoinette movie.
Oh yeah. Oh goodness, so many ins and outs and what have yous, as the dude would say. Okay, is this the last? Yeah, this is the last quote that we had. Do you want to say anything else about that before we touch upon a couple of things and then go and see how many of these comments we can get through?
Well, I'd say that Paine was not. Paine was not a.
And I have two things I want to touch upon, but before that, I just want to say that I want to give you a chance to wrap up this part.
Paine was not a great revolutionary socialist. He wasn't a great economic revolutionary, but as I said, I think that his populism led him to side with that at the end of the day. He wrote that last book, Agrarian Justice, in response to an insurrection that took place prior to the rise of Napoleon. It was sort of the last gasp of revolutionary socialism of the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. It was under the Directory. It was after the Terror. It was after Robespierre, and it looked like that the Civil War might come back to France. And he said there needs to be massive land reform. Not just the aristocratic estates, the bourgeois estates too need to be redistributed to the small peasants.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to ask, because he left, didn't he? He left the U.S. After the Constitution was established. What was going on there? Why did he skedaddle?
Yeah. Well, there are some ultra leftists kind of barking at me that he was basically exiled from the country, which isn't really accurate. There are some ways in which he was too radical for the majority of founders, and also possibly too honest. Okay. He exposed a number of corruption scandals that took place among the founders. Most of them were kind of like low-level people, but they were low-level people with connections. So they're like these big controversies in the 1780s. There was this guy, Silas Deane, who was a kind of a war profiteer, who was sort of skimming off the French aid that they were getting. And Paine was a good investigative journalist, and that was almost more of his vocation more than politician. And he kind of called this guy out, and there was a big kerfuffle over that, and he did make some enemies. And he also even took on Jefferson and Washington and some other people, because they were trying to like make money off of land deals in the western parts of the states, because the western borders of the states hadn't been drawn yet. So there are a lot of people just grabbing land out there for themselves and saying, this is 200 miles from civilization in Virginia, but it's still Virginia, and we can just grab it. And so he kind of took on the interests of a lot of the big landowners, including Washington and Jefferson, and that was a drama, but he prevailed in that, and that's actually one of the ways in which he exercised political influence, because then there was a legislation to cement the borders of the states and make new states out of the West, but to do it gradually, to make it federal land. So that's another part of the sort of non-libertarian aspect of Thomas Paine, by the way, that he sort of established the principle of like federal land to prevent private landowners from just sort of gobbling up the West for themselves, and instead had to be apportioned in a sensible, relatively equitable way.
Okay.
But there's no evidence that he was like completely chased out of the country, because the place that he went to was England, which was kind of inherently hostile to him. It was after the U.S. and the British. It was after the U.S. and the British were at peace, but he was seen as being the agent of a foreign power, and he went there, and he made even more enemies in England. The case for him just sort of being chased out of the U.S. I don't think he would have allowed himself to be chased out of the U.S. He's not the kind of guy to run to a fight. And he basically ran towards a fight by going to England and trying to agitate for a republic there.
Okay. So he was like the original kind of social justice warrior, like activist. Like he liked that part, not the actual, because he never had, did he even ever want some sort of government position?
Yeah, he did. He had several government positions, but no, he did not want a government career. No.
Okay.
He didn't want to make those kind of compromises.
And was he a professional, or was he a gentleman, as we would say, or the English would say? Like, did he have to work for his living, or did he have a nice little nest egg? I'm just curious.
No, I mean, that's another thing that makes it a bit like Marx and Lenin is that he kind of was a professional revolutionary, and he kind of he came from a middle class family who are kind of like tailors. They specialized in making corsets, and he tried doing that for a while. He worked in the civil service in England for a while, and kind of like got kicked out for exposing corruption there. Tried to run a tobacco shop that failed, and then he started writing articles and exposés for republicanism, and got on the radar of Benjamin Franklin, and who invited him to come to the U.S. And so, yeah, you were making an analogy before. People have called him before the Che Guevara of the 18th century.
Okay.
So he was internationalist.
Not the Ralph Nader.
No, not the. I think more like
just sniffing out that corruption. I mean,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And that is the argument for him being anti-imperialist, I think, is because such as the American empire was in the 18th century, he wasn't interested in building it. I think he was very focused on bringing down the British Empire. Like that's part of what his internationalism was. He wanted to go back. In some ways, I think he may have always seen himself as an exiled Englishman. And he wanted to go back and try and overthrow the monarchy in England. And then he was chased out of England.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one thing. Okay, I'm sorry, that makes sense, because if I think about him in those terms, it makes sense. Like that, the U.S. one would be kind of the opening act. Now I'm going to go for Papa Bear. Yeah. And there's still the monarchy still here, a version of it at least. Sucking off that teat.
There's still work to be done.
Yeah, there's work to be done. Oh my goodness. Okay. So it's not quite clear why how much of it was he was put. I guess we could use the immigration terms, push and pull. How much he was pushed towards the UK, and how much there was a pull there for whatever reason. It wasn't we couldn't say that he was canceled, to use the parlance of our time, to exiled like Assad to Russia or something.
Well,
obviously not that dramatic.
I mean, it is we should mention that he kind of was, at the end of his life, when he returned to the U.S., he kind of was canceled for being anti-Christian.
Oh, okay.
Because he wrote a critique of Christian fundamentalism, I guess you would say. He himself said he was not an atheist. He said he was a deist, right? That he believed there was a creator, a divine creator, but he did not believe that the Bible was the revealed word of God. That was a change from when he wrote Common Sense. From Common Sense, he actually used many biblical arguments. But ultimately, the reason why Paine was a dark horse of the revolution probably first and foremost had to do with that critique of Christianity he made.
Okay. And do you think that was probably always there? I mean, maybe because I'm thinking if I'm talking to people and I'm trying to foment the resolve and the ideas for around breaking, getting independence from Britain, and most of the people I'm talking to are Christian of one way or another, it kind of makes sense to use biblical passages. Or do you think, or was there something in his life that kind of, there was a turning point when he realized, like, I need to be more critical?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because he definitely, had a Christian upbringing and Christian education because everyone did, and he kept up on it, and he constructed those, very fine-grained biblical arguments in Common Sense and presented them authentically. It came across authentically. But he was a man of science and a man of the Enlightenment. I mean, he really was. He really did increasingly become a man of science. He was very interested in engineering and tried to basically pursue an engineering career and engineering projects. When he went back to Europe, he designed an iron suspension bridge or something of that sort.
Well, and to be fair, it's like I'm not. I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but there's certainly passages from the Bible and other religious texts that I think are good passages.
Yeah.
You don't have to believe that it's, a literal interpretation to find that. I mean, liberation theology and all that type of stuff as well. There's various interpretations, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not.
Well, it's another
any sort of imagination on Thomas Paine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he claimed that he never was a full-on atheist, and he was against atheism, and that he originally wrote the book actually to oppose atheism, and that he saw too much atheism in France, and he wanted,
not just libertinism, not like just transgressing norms, but like literal.
Well, he may have equated the two.
Not buying it. Yeah.
He may have equated the two.
Okay.
As I said, he would have, the Marquis de Sade was around in those days.
Yeah, so being an atheist and being a sinner are two different. Oh well, I mean.
Yeah.
So it could be both, but yeah. All right. So,
but he's making a strong case for materialism. At that point where it needed to be made.
All right. So, in terms of let's see what I want to know. So it seems like he was always in terms of in the United States. So he was all, it was all cool when he was the Thomas Paine of Common Sense. It seems that was, everybody was down with that, at least in that time period, of the people who were involved in.
Well, the majority was.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson loved him, and Washington and Adams and Hamilton not so much.
Oh, okay. So
Sam Adams was a supporter. Yeah.
All right. So what I want to get is that the things about him that were polarizing or celebrated or not, how have those changed over? Can we kind of say how those have changed over time from the point of, I mean, obviously not every single change, from the time that he was alive to what's going on in that Yarvin Rufo thing? Or is it the same stuff, just different people taking issue with it?
Well,
because I know what the people on the left would say, because of course we know what that is, but because if you have the they'll find sexist comments, or he wasn't critical enough about slavery, or whatever that. I mean, we know I think that argument is clear. The left's argument is clear, but I think at least from my mind, what I was less aware of is the people on the right or the alt-right, their issue with figures like Paine. So.
Well, the possibility that Paine and the American Revolution could be seen as being a counter-revolution of any sort.
Mm-hmm. A counter towards what?
Well, a counter towards monarchy.
Okay.
Or against democracy.
Okay.
Was not really feasible in the 18th century and the early 19th century. Mm-hmm. There's, you can argue, you could say, obviously there was a debate, just like that Samuel Adams versus John Adams debate. But that was resolved in many respects by the fact that Adams lost the election of 1800. He was a one-term president, and it was partly because he came down so hard against the French Revolution, against radical democracy, leaning towards the British, leaning towards elitism. Mm-hmm. And Jefferson overwhelmingly defeated him. Jefferson, who was Paine's closest, most ardent supporter among the founders.
Okay.
And the most ardent supporter of the French Revolution among the founders, the big time ones. Mm-hmm. So I believe that the majority of Americans did see in their time, contrary to Edmund Burke, did see a strong relationship between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. They wanted to be more moderate about it, and there were things about the Reign of Terror that repulsed them, and particularly about the Napoleonic Wars and that whole shit show that was going on in the 19th century.
Yeah.
But the majority of the generation that founded the American Revolution were sympathizers with the French Revolution. I think that basic fact is correct. I think to some degree that's evidenced by the fact that the Marquis de Lafayette, who is like the young, progressive French aristocrat who had fought in the American Revolution and had helped begin the French Revolution, although he was a moderate. He didn't participate in the Reign of Terror. But the Marquis de Lafayette, shortly before he died, he came back to America and had to tour, and he was like completely celebrated and welcomed. Much more than Thomas Paine was. But as I said, that Paine's unpopularity at the end of his life had more to do with his anti-Christian position. So the fact that the Marquis de Lafayette had brought the revolution. And he had brought the radical Enlightenment to France. Was not considered to be a betrayal of the American Revolution. It was considered to be a noble, if failed, extension of it.
All right, and I think just to read it, because I think we touched upon this already. I jumped ahead, but in terms of, it's always difficult to take people out of their, to pluck them out of their time period and shove them into our current categories or understanding of them. But it seems that if we had to put them in the, even though we might have to push it, but it might not be the perfectly placed piece. I guess we have to say that kind of he definitely seems to have more proto-socialist or what we would call socialist tended ideas. more so than libertarian, and certainly not conservative.
No.
Or conservative liberal.
Well, yeah. I mean,
if we look at what he said, if we look at what he wrote, yeah, what he did.
Yeah.
What we want.
And that doesn't mean that conservatives have to either love Paine, every aspect of him, or else become monarchists. I'm not. That isn't what you should take.
Yarvin's drawn a line in the sand. What?
But I think
this is the cathedral, and this is not. You in and you out. Yeah.
You have to accept that these radical people and these basically proto-Marxist people are part of the American tradition and the Western tradition. There's like absolutely no way to separate your patriotism from them. And yeah.
What do you mean by that? Separate your patriotism from them? I think I know, but
well, the country wouldn't exist without Thomas Paine, most likely. He's absolutely intrinsic to the revolution. And as I said, Americans, despite what they perceived as his blasphemy at the end of his life, largely understood that in his time. And certainly Thomas Jefferson understood that. So you can't basically be a counter-revolutionary and a patriot. It's just, particularly in this country, it just doesn't add up. Now there are ways, obviously, in which, as a cultural
and what you mean by that, I just want to clarify. What you mean by that is that it's really difficult to be at all at peace with being an American if you're counter or anti or have basically want to negate the American Revolution. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you actually understand the history and the essence of the country.
All right. And so that kind of leads into to reiterate again. So when we'll just use the figure of Thomas Paine, because that's what started this whole discussion. And I'll go back to the tweet to have you just kind of recap, or have her dot any I's and cross any T's. Oopsie! Before we look and see what kind of how many questions we can or comments we can put on the screen. So Thomas again. Eddie tweeted. Thomas Paine wrote this fire. Common sense, and MFs still want to say the American Revolution was reactionary or bad, or all white supremacist, colonialist, imperialist, patriarchal, heteronormative, etc., etc., etc. And yeah, shit happened. So anyway, and you are saying MFs on the ultra right and the ultra left. So using this as a thing, what would you say? Just to kind of sum up. Let's see, if you had like you were caught in an elevator with the lady who spearheaded the 1619 project, yeah, or maybe some young followers of hers, and they're taking their American studies classes and they're learning how there's just it's all bad and terrible and whatnot. I'm generalizing here. What would you say to them about that position? And then we'll fast forward it to you ending so we'll do that first. So you're in an elevator for a minute or so or two with the people who you would consider the MFers on the ultra left who want to dismiss the American Revolution in that period as reactionary, or then you get caught up with some, a few 24-year-olds who just got out of the Rufo Yarvin debate and they're feeling their oats. What would you tell them? You can pick which one you want to start with. Which elevator are you in? The Rufo Yarvo people or the 1619? people who read that and are like feeling like, yeah, they're feeling like this is so important.
I guess with the wokesters, I would say, you've got to cope with the modern world on some level. You're right to want to improve on it, but you sort of like you sort of have to appreciate how far we've come and the people who made it possible. I think I would almost say to both of them, like, the majority of people in the world don't like anarchy and they don't like monarchy, as far as we can tell. The majority of them like republics. They like a developed, advanced, comfortable republics, and that's what the founders of America helped to create. As ugly, as that process was, there was a lot of ugliness before that that they inherited, and there wasn't any way around. It's actually a lot of the same arguments I would say in defense of communism, because they're both arguments against revolution, as far as I'm concerned, on the basis that the revolution wasn't perfect, and the basis that the revolution was bloody. It's just that, in the case of the USSR,
and the people involved were flawed.
Yeah, in the case of the USSR,
that nowadays we're like, ooh, yeah,
it's
or at least we should be.
In the case of the USSR, it's the kulaks. In the case of America, it's the Indians, but you can't demand that kind of perfectionism and bloodlessness from history. You have to look into the context of what a bloodbath history was leading up to that.
Well, I think also just to acknowledge that, and that because if we take Hannah Nicole Jones, is that her name? Yeah. And some of these other people, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing, and the positions that they have wouldn't exist if not for this whole process.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it's almost, and I think it's really not, be as critical as you want about the history. I mean, I think that, you can write whatever historiography you want. And I meant to ask you, when did that become a thing? Because I noticed, I don't think it was about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I started seeing the term historiography instead of biography. And I thought maybe that was like a thing to highlight that this is a story of history. This is one narrative of history, not the history. Is that where that came from? It's hard to say.
Yes,
I mean, I can read it, but it's hard to say.
Well, it's
like historiography. Historiography. I have to work on it.
It's the history of the writing of history, or like just of a given topic. If you read the average history journal article, the first 5 or 6 paragraphs of it, maybe not that much, but the first few paragraphs of it are going to discuss what earlier writers have written about this subject, and how your view of it is different and or similar to what was written before, or and so that's basically what historiography is. And you can do broader things where you like study the changing of historical perspective over hundreds of years. But
well, just to use a kind of, and excuse my analogy, because I took my girls to go see Wicked yesterday as an example of a historiography, but of a literature one. So of course, The Wizard of Oz was written. We have the whole thing about the
bimetallism.
The conceit of the conceit of Wicked is that it's written from the perspective or the point of view of the Wicked Witch of the West. Yeah. And so basically she was like not to, spoiler alert, if people who aren't familiar with it, she turns out like she wasn't a Wicked Witch of the West. She was actually a revolutionary. So, and so this is kind of like a historiography. So you have like the consensus or the mainstream, Wizard of Oz, Wicked Witch of the West, all this type of thing. And then you have a historiography. It's like, well, what if we center this character? Or what if we center this part? I think there was a similar thing to, not that it was as successful maybe, but remember like the Subaltern History Project? I don't know if you're familiar with that in India. mostly Brahmins, but the thing got together and they were like, they wanted to kind of do this counter history and focus on the quote unquote subaltern and the peasants and whatnot. And again, and then you get really kind of creative. Of course, Spivak was Derrida and whatnot, and you get like, history of the absences, and you have to interpret the absences, which is okay. I don't know if you could call that history, but it's
yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of this going
the hypothesis
on
without the experiment, without the data.
Yeah,
The hypothesis
and
without
this
the data.
historiography, and again, when academia is also a business, so you have to figure out something you're going to do. So this historiography, sky's the limit. There's no limit on historiography. You could, then you have historiographies of historiographies, and it goes on and on and on. And it's like deconstruction. It just is, a kind of a bad circle, a bad what is it? Whatever you call it, bad infinity.
The snake eating its own tail.
Yeah. It's okay. So cool. Yeah, and you said that you would say this.
But that's cool for Wicked, but it's like there's also such a thing as objective truth in
yeah. I mean, now I don't know. Was she wicked or was she a revolutionary? She was both. Maybe she was a wicked revolutionary.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem with postmodernism.
What about the monkeys?
Everything's
the flying
just
monkeys. What's their story? Maybe she was a bitch. I don't know. Sorry.
It's good fun.
Mind control? Was it MAK Ultra or was there serious solidarity there? I don't know. Anyway, how funny.
We need both sciences and arts.
This is true.
Not everything is art. Not everything is art criticism.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who go into who go into these fields actually are kind of frustrated artists.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is off track, but I remember when I was still thinking I was going to be an urbanist or urban studies thing, and people would start talking about like the poetry of cement, and how kind of like it was just insane. Basically a lot of delusion. You're going to talk about the sand because, of course, sand, we forget, is a limited resource. And if you have all this construction going on, there's a big building boom after, it's been going on, but especially after the financial crisis, there's this huge, so you had, the sand trade and both the black market and the not and whatnot. And so I remember reading somebody's like really when this like poetic thing, and I kept on forgetting that they were talking about informal sand markets. It was really and I was like, what is it, rhizomatic? What's happening? Lines of flight? What's going on? And I'm like, this person wanted to stay in comparative literature, but they couldn't. That's what I think happened.
Yeah, use the metaphors. Don't let the metaphors use you.
There you go, Garrett. All right, so let's see what kind of hate and love and other things we got going on here in the chat. Okay, so, or maybe they were talking to each other, then it's nothing about us. That's also, Tony came up. Okay, people, hi, thank you. If you're still watching, we're gonna go through the comments. Any comments and questions that were directed to us that won't get us kicked off YouTube if I read them out loud. Let's see. How evil. Okay, here we go. Let's start here. Joseph Stalin. Thomas Paine has nothing on Machiavelli and the Prince. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I'm just they took the time to watch us and to type in the comments. So unless it's something very mean, I'm going to.
I'm trying to think what that means. I mean, that could be more than one thing. I don't know. Okay.
Anyway, Thomas Paine, Joseph Stalin says Thomas Paine has nothing on Machiavelli and the Prince. Okay. Whereas they give me flowery words.
He was more idealistic than Machiavelli.
Yeah.
Give him that. So maybe he could have learned a few things. I don't know.
Joe Stalin is continuing. Whereas they give me flowery words about a supposed perfect republic. Okay. Machiavelli gave me okay, here we go. Let's read this all together. So Thomas Paine has nothing on Machiavelli and the Prince. Whereas maybe Thomas Paine gave me flowery words about a supposed perfect republic, Machiavelli gave me the truth of humanity. Oh. Realpolitik.
Well, I'm going to say that's a both and. that's like. And
all I'm seeing right now is your head, Garrett. If you could sit up a bit or move your camera.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. Unless that was on purpose.
I think it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the point of dialectical materialism is there is still some aspect of idealism. There is, there is still some vision of human improvement and even perfection in the long term. Yeah. It's very, very, very long term, but it's not pure.
Are you going to quote Martin Luther King at me now, like the
arc of justice?
The arc of justice.
But I don't think it's like pure like cynical materialism. And I'm not saying that's Machiavelli is as simple as that. But it kind of leans. If you're going to contrast Paine and Machiavelli, then that's the way it would break down. You don't necessarily have to contrast them. You could just say that like the Prince is a kind of how-to. And the Prince is kind of a how-to book, and Common Sense is more like why bother?
Okay.
why bother trying to change the world? Well, because it could be better.
I don't know. Ronald Reagan, he was a pioneering cyber libertarian. Tech can fix everything. I don't know who this is. But we like Keith. Let's see.
The libertarian part, maybe, but
I don't know who Ronald Reagan is. Do you know who that is?
He means Ronald Reagan.
Oh, Ronald.
That was a name people would call him sometimes.
Well, thank God you're here. I was like, Ronald Reagan. I was like, oh my God. Well, and I even said it twice and with the sound.
There's the Star Wars program with like, I don't know, it was like the anti-ballistic lasers or something. So some people would call him Ronald Reagan. Some people on the left.
Okay, sorry. Oh, you got me, Keith. Bastard. No, I love you. I love Keith. Okay. Let's see. Race Tech. Joseph Stalin. Let's see. I'm just going through. I'm just reading seeing what's for.
Well, he gave a shit ton of money to the Pentagon, though. Which isn't very libertarian. That was great for developing tech, but he presented himself as libertarian.
Okay, so this was, I think Joseph and Keith were talking with each other. Here's Tony. Let's see. Is Garrett aware of the history of the colonization of the East Coast from New Amsterdam, etc.? How the Europeans, entrenched a worldview of expansion by taking the natives' lands, farms, and produce. Assuming so.
Yes, very much so. But that happened before Washington and Jefferson, and they inherited that situation.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
But that's, as I said, it illustrates that the process was already well underway, with or without Washington and Jefferson. Under the British and the Spanish and the French.
Mm. Well, no, the race was, to go around and plant your flag where you could. And of course, I think this is a larger thing because I also know that I don't, well, why not? I don't claim to be a economic historian, but I know there was also, one of the things is that with the colonialism and with the, especially when talking about of North America, or what is now the United States, is that there was people who went because they, the adventurers, they wanted to, find stuff to bring back and sell, and they wanted to do buy things. But there was also places that it also benefited England to get people to leave and go someplace else. Yeah. So if you have too much, if you have too many, when they have too many people, or if they're whatever's going on economically, that also benefit them, that they would encourage people to go to the New World. Yeah. This is because also benefited them, because then people there. I mean, the settlement thing is not the Israelis didn't invent that. So
the trajectory of manifest destiny starts right there. I mean, that is going west.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first you go out to the countryside more. First, there's the expansion to the countryside, and then beyond. And I'm not saying that there was no agency involved there, but yeah, that's a bit of a different story. Joseph Stalin, who needs colonies when you got an entire continent? Let's see. Only small nations like the UK does that, or nations lacking natural resources. Well, what I would say to that is that you also, I think it depends on, again, what, in terms of the context, because right now, a lot of what is driving, at least if I put on my Marxist-Leninist hat and Alexander McKay, is that you have finance capital who's looking for places to invest. Yeah. So it's not just looking for natural resources. Of course, there's an interest in this kind of uneven development, or the uneven exchange argument of the new imperialism, or current imperialism. But there's also that finance capital wants to go where it wants to go. Wants to go where it can get the greatest yield or return, which also has a lot of political and economic consequences. As that stuff flying around, the special economic zones and the race to the bottom and all variety of other things. So it's not only for natural resources that you have an interest in the economic systems outside your border, I would say. Do you have anything to say about that, Garrett?
Yeah, that's fair. And that's definitely the 20th century onwards. He has more of a point about natural resources in the 18th century at the same time. And that was part of the contradiction that leads to the revolution, is that that the British just wanted the America as a source of natural resources primarily, and not allowing them to do their own manufacturing, putting up economic roadblocks to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, they definitely played different games in India than they did in the United States. What became the United States. So, but yeah. Anyway, and how much had to do with? Yeah, I mean, obviously, there could be. I'm sure there was a quite clearly probably a racial component to that. Well, they felt, maybe. I mean, I don't know. But I'm just thinking, like, looking back, and when you look back at some of the things that went on in India with the, if I think about what's his name, Mike Davis, it's like the Great Victorian Holocaust and the variety of other things that the UK would do to the Indian economy for the benefit of the metropole, of course, and this was after the states was its own thing, but it's hard to know if if they. We don't have an experiment anymore when they had a colony that was mainly of settlers from the UK and Europe, and what they did to when they colonized India. But I'm quite sure that the racial thing there played a justification role. Anyway, if I think about what Churchill said, but that's a different story. Sorry, rambling. I got to stay focused on the task, the theme. Let's see. I'm just reading through here, going through the comments. I'll just put them up, and then I can, because this is taking too long. USA is so resource rich they could close themselves off from the world and do fine. I think he's talking about now.
I don't know about that.
And he's saying they used to do. Yeah, they used to do that. It was called isolationism. Well, he needs to read the Kagan book and get back to us.
Well, it could definitely become more self-sufficient than it is. But
well, no, I mean the whole the quote unquote deindustrialization thing that happened. I mean, that didn't have to happen. That was, a quite successful class project, and couching it as freedom. Yeah, it's free. It's great. Capital's free. You're free. It's all free. Woo-hoo. Yeah.
You're gonna have to define what you mean by closing off, though.
Huh? Oh, him. Yeah. Well, he's saying basically what Joseph Stalin is saying is that the U.S. has everything it needs, that I guess it wouldn't need to trade with anybody. It could just trade with itself. Auto trade.
Not in the 21st century, but in the 19th.
Hard to say.
Yeah, to some extent.
I mean, well, they definitely need. They don't have the rare earth metals they need. They don't have the rare earth metals
are really important in a digital age. So.
Yeah, so it depends on what kind of world we're living in. Let's see.
India,
talking about the Freemasons now.
Did we make our own ink or own indigo? Maybe we did.
Yeah. Freemason slogans. Okay, this is. Okay, let's see what. Okay. Okay, here's Tony. Tony wants to push back here. Race was central to the colonial project from New Amsterdam onwards, codified into law to restrict black labor. I just spent this past semester writing about that period and its laws in particular. What I would say is that Garrett isn't saying that race wasn't an issue or that racism didn't exist. He was questioning the type of 1619 projects who want to center that, who want to make the American story a story about race relations exclusively or particularly, yeah? But I'll let you talk for yourself.
Yeah, well, he does say central, but central...
No, I was saying that you didn't say...
This to me is kind of race reductionist to me. I don't really sympathize with it. I mean... well, for one thing, this isn't the colonial project. This is the anti-colonial project. This is separating from the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, but the U.S., did its own colonizing and its own racializing. There's no question to that. But the question of whether or not it's central, you could ask, why does the United States continue to exist after the end of Jim Crow? Why didn't that destroy the country? Why didn't the abolition of slavery destroy the country if the country is entirely dependent on white supremacy?
Good question. So we'll hopefully
South Africa.
And we know how to get a hold of Tony. We'll forward that to him. He has to say.
South Africa had to get a new constitution when apartheid ended.
Good point. So I think that's also that
Israel would have to get a new constitution and maybe a new name if their apartheid ended.
Well, and new identity. Anyway, so they I know you must be familiar with Adolph Reed, yeah? Adolph Reed Jr. So when he's combating a lot of this stuff, one of the things that he says is that people who make this kind of argument want to act like nothing's changed. That would still, so it's Jim Crow from the new Jim Crow, or when he's talking about here, so the colonial project from New Amsterdam onwards, race was central, okay, in an unchanging ahistorical manner, has that changed over time? And how do you account for those changes? And what would be the risk of it going like somehow we revert back to like, no, we have to have a race-based caste system or like explicitly would be is the question is that and I think that I think this is from Adolf. I was thinking about the other name. Adolph Reed Jr. says is that everything has changed about Black politics except for how it's talked about, or about race politics except for how it's talked about. I think is something that he said at quite time is like kind of gonna go on again, looking at it as a very ahistorically or detached from a more dialectical materialist or historical materialist analysis of these relations.
Yeah. I agree with that, absolutely. And I think that there's people have forgotten, someone was saying like he doesn't know when communists praised the American Revolution. The preamble to the Black Panther Party, you want to talk about race, preamble to the Black Panther Party 10-point program quotes the Declaration of Independence. And it doesn't quote it just to be sarcastic. it's quoting it, in the fucking preamble. They mean it. They mean that these are positive socialistic values, basic humanist republicanism, represent the highest aspirations of humanity, and that the founders articulated them better than anyone before, and in some ways since.
Yeah, so Laura Jones, thank you for the great show, Poor Native Americans Written Out of the History. Well, this is true.
Well, not for the past 50 years. But and they shouldn't be, but there's also danger of writing other things out of history. As I said, my point is both the left and the right are in danger of sort of forgetting the original humanist Republican project.
Well, and I think you can do both. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to diminish what happened to the Native Americans with the in the history of the United States, but but also you can't self-flagellate over it. I mean, you can't go back and undo that. We weren't there then, so and I don't know, who knows what I would have done, or I could have done anything. So there's the thing is like, how to deal with that now, the current situations now, with not just Native Americans, but that's again is the thing is with universal policies. If it's about health, you would imagine that Native Americans who are alive now, who are in a difficult situation, would benefit as much from universal policies as any other group, or maybe more so if they're disproportionately impoverished, housing deprivation, et cetera. So that's what I would say. And I think that there's been so that's it's not excusing it, but if you're going to talk about the American Revolution and how that was instigated, and how the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, all this, the federalism and all that stuff happened, it doesn't really make much sense to center Native Americans in that, because bad things were happening to them, obviously, but they weren't involved in that political.
They also fought on both sides.
Yeah.
For the record.
Go ahead.
They also fought on both sides. There were some Native American tribes who fought on the side of the patriots against the British.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about that history, because I just know that there's some things about how my guess is it's kind of like maybe a similar thing that's going on now, is that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and there could have been some transactional relationships, like when the French and the British and whoever else were fighting over territorial control there, that the different tribes would pair up with different ones. That's and why they did that, how that was chosen, I have no idea. Keith Hayes, Paine was a badass. Can you recommend a good book about that? Oh, I think, is she talking about Native Americans? Oh, Laura, what do you mean? There's lots about what in particular, about this time period, about
I would recommend. There's a collection of Paine's. There's a Thomas Paine reader that's edited by Eric Foner. That's a pretty good introduction.
Yeah, but I think she's talking about the Native Americans, about the Native Indians during this time period.
No, I don't know a text offhand. No.
Mm-hmm. We'll have to get back to you. I know there's some.
The Invasion of America by that's not really about the American Revolution, but it has some stuff about it.
Okay, hold on, just saying here. So, like the different relationships. We'll have to get back. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. There's something. I'm thinking I know something but I get confused because I know I'm more familiar with the historiographies, if you will, focusing on the slave trade and cotton and this type of thing. With the Native Americans, that's we'll see. And Laura, you can DM me like more like in particular what you're interested in. Because of course there's people who have like anthropologists who've gone and tried to like who wanted to go and study them before they were all, sounds terrible, but like extinct, of course, during that period. I don't know. I'll have to get back to you, and I can also ask a couple of other people who I know. My brother, for example, considers himself a historian. Well, he is. He's a history teacher, so I'm sure he probably is. I'll get back to you. No, for sure. It's part of obviously that's part of American history. But if we're talking about the American Revolution in particular, and how that's being, how we've gotten to the place, especially on the left, but also that it's become like it used to be something that was held up with all its fault, all the faults of the country and all the whatever, the things that were in it. There's become this thing now that it's like, oh, it's just, these were all these terribly racist, patriarchal, slaveholding people. And so that taints the whole enterprise that you can't, that's impossible to separate out that from the things we might want to be like, well, look at this Bill of Rights and look at this stuff and look at the stuff that, well, I'll let you talk about it before. Yeah. Garrett, about, of course, because this is always hanging over, because whenever it's important, and how, it's just a tension that's always going to be there, I think, is that whatever you choose to foreground, other things get pushed to the background. You can't talk about everything else at once. And so it's always going to be this tension, for lack of a better word. So if we're focusing, like we chose to do today, looking at this, both the far left and the alt-right wanting to basically shit on aspects of this period of the revolution and to push back on that. No one is saying that, you have to deal with that as well as what was going on with the Native Americans throughout this whole period. And of course, with slavery and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
But you have to, you can't, I'll
absolutely.
Say something better than I just, my word salad there.
Yeah, and at the present time, I don't feel like the Native Americans are being neglected, that their history is being neglected. It's getting
today.
It's getting a good deal of attention in the 21st century, and it should. A complicated thing about it that is an obstacle is
and there's also a tendency to romanticize everything. Yeah,
there is a tendency to do that, and also there were 500 different nations, 500 different tribes. So how much time do you want to spend on each of those 500 different ones? It can get kind of overwhelming. One thing I'll say that's relevant to this story that I think is just interesting to think about is like just the Enlightenment in general and Native Americans and America, and then the founding of an American Republic is like, the discovery of Native American societies was a massive thing for the Enlightenment. You know, it's just people in Europe under feudalism, you know, they barely knew what freedom was. That's like what is both like, you know, weird and important about like the individualism in the Enlightenment, and you know, this whole concept of freedom, and how that's both you know, it's a legacy and at the same time a misinterpretation of what Native American societies were. You know, just that there was this kind of decentralization, that there wasn't a feudal order, you know, for Native Americans. But it's, as I said, it's really tricky to know how to interpret that from the perspective of European civilization. Like, part of the reason, you know, they could just kind of roam free is because they didn't have technology, the kind of technology that they had in Europe, right? Like, they didn't even have the wheel, you know, they didn't have metallurgy. And that takes the idea of a complex society completely off the table. It takes the idea of a centralized society off the table. So it's not as if the Native Americans chose a freer way of life, you understand, or a more equal way of life. It was simply that was to a very large extent determined by the material conditions. But the Enlightenment Europeans were completely, you know, fascinated by these American societies and these indigenous societies. John Locke, you know, famously, you know, he says at the beginning of his famous treatise, "In the beginning, all the world was America," right? And he sees this as the natural state of man and
nature.
and natural, which is, you know, you can say is an oversimplification.
All language is an oversimplification.
But
I can do Pomo too, baby.
And he's saying he's taking inspiration from this, but at the same time he's promoting individualism, which is, you don't really have that kind of individualism in Native American societies. So it's kind of
we'd say there wasn't a lot of alienation, probably. And I don't want to get too philosophical, but alienation has a double edge to it. If you're Hegelian, at least there's a positive and negative side of alienation in terms of the development of freedom. But that's a different thing. Oh my God, that just flew out. Woo. Anyway, and in terms of Laura had asked what the Native American Native rights of man would have looked like. Yeah, I mean, we know this, that there's a lot of there's no shortage of contradictions in the Enlightenment. That you have these whether we can start it from whoever we want to start it from, that colonialism and imperialism causes a lot of problem with that, because then you get quite sure, well, apparently this who qualifies as a human and a man for these rights obviously wasn't everybody. We know that, and that's also why a lot of these things, but like even when it comes to the Haitian Revolution or the other ones, would use these norms and these Enlightenment ideals and be like, well, hey, wait a minute, yeah, we're into that, yeah. That's also something that, or the people who didn't want anything to do with that type of society. And I'm thinking of, I'll try to get the book if you're interested, if Laura, if you're still listening. But I remember, God, it might have been back in undergrad. I think Chicana literature class of all things. But the way that what happened in what's now the United States, if you compare that to what happened in South America, not the major. I think the majority of the native populations in South America were not wiped out. There was a lot of nastiness. Don't get me wrong, and one of the arguments that I had a professor that made once is one of the people upon a thing, the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism, that for some reason the Catholic, like a worldview, for lack of a better word, could merge better, and I'm sure the postmodernists love this hybridity, could merge better with at least some of the indigenous populations that they found that were in South America, then the Protestants, for whatever reason, just couldn't. That just wasn't even possible to fathom. That's one argument that I don't know enough about, but I thought was really interesting because, for example, you have like the Virgin of what's that name? Virgin of something. And anyway, so you had a lot of shrines.
Well, the Protestants always said the Catholics were pagans. So
yeah. Well, you know what I mean? But I don't know if you've ever came across that argument, but I think it's interesting because it's quite clear that what happened with the Portuguese and the Spanish colonies was a different trajectory than what happened with the British colonies and then initial 13 British colonies and went out. And I think also, I don't know what happened enough in Quebec and part of Canada. But Quebec, I'm assuming they were also the French, were mainly Catholic, yeah. So maybe there's something with that for whatever reason, it wasn't as wasn't near as exterminatory.
I think
because the natives they weren't exterminated.
Factors too.
Go ahead, please.
I think it's a factor, but I think there's material factors too.
Yeah,
it was just harder to conquer South America. Particularly Europeans in that climate.
Maybe there's more people there. I don't even know.
And to get through the jungle and all that, it would have to be a much.
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
it's kind of stumbling kind of conquest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I remember I'll try to see if I find that book. But I remember thinking like, oh, that's really fascinating because you do have a lot of, and it seemed like maybe the Catholics because again another part we know this of the colonial project was the what do you call them? Not mercenaries. They were there too. There's also mercenaries, but missionaries, yeah. And so you had Catholic missionaries. And nowadays you still have Catholic missionaries. We have the Mormons, but they weren't around then. But you didn't really have these Protestant missionaries trying to. And the ones that, trying to, they weren't the ones that were trying to run schools for Native Americans. Those were mainly Catholic, weren't they? And those that weren't particularly nice.
I think so. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, it was a little. I think Catholics are a little more assimilationist, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think they were kind of cool. Like, okay, yeah, you have this shrine, you have this God, and we have this saint, or we have Mary, we have whatever. So let's kind of, do your thing. And I remember my friend, it was
the Spanish Inquisition was no joke.
But that was in Spain, yeah? That wasn't in.
Well, there was elements of that. I mean, in the New World.
And it seems like the Aztecs and the Incas weren't peace loving. I mean, I don't know. They had that cool calendar and all, but
and the Spanish treatment of them was not that peace-like.
No. Again, I'm not. Yeah. But anyway, it's interesting, and I don't know any more about that. I just remember hearing that argument and thinking, oh, that's an interesting wrinkle. Not that, but I think quite right that we wouldn't want to, or probably wouldn't want to make that the over determining factor, but I think it'd be hard to make the argument that it wasn't one because Catholicism quite popular in South America and Central America.
Yeah.
I don't know if others. I'm sure there's other things getting the inroads now, but anyway, okay.
It could be both. Just that, like, Catholics are too feudal to be efficient. Genocide, do an efficient genocide.
Yeah, I don't. But it's always fun to pile on the Protestants, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like predestination. These guys can't be predestined. I can't be, I mean, if you think about it, if they were hardcore Calvinists, it'd be hard to be like, oh, the Indian too just didn't know it. I mean, but I don't know enough about that doctrine. Okay, Derek.
But again, the founders, Thomas Paine, they pushed back against strict Protestantism. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated.
Okay. So you're saying more revolutionary than reactionary. Yeah. It was an imperfect revolution, but a revolution nonetheless.
Hell yeah.
And then we can incorporate and deal with the negative without getting rid of the red thread of that arc of progress, or
you don't really have a choice unless you want to go with anarchy or monarchy, and both of those are probably bound to fail anyway. So.
How about an anarcho-monarcho? Anarcho-monarchy. I'm fine with anarchy, an anarchic monarchy. There you go.
I think that's how fascism started.
yeah, that's true. I'm thinking now of like Joffrey or some Game of Thrones. It's like, and now this. You've displeased me. All right, Garrett. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say while I turn on the music.
Happy New Year for those of you who use the Protestant calendar.
The Judeo-Christian calendar. What year is it?
Not the Mayan calendar.
What year is it in the Chinese calendar? What year is it? I was born in the year of the tiger, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I'll have to find out. All right. Yeah, Happy New Year. I'll see you next year, Garrett. Thank you very much for coming on. Garrett is the Social Populist. He has a Substack. Oh my God, do I even have your... Did I do that? Oh, I did. Garrett, look at me. I'm on the ball here. I do have...
Remember, it's the socialpopulist.substack.com.
Won't this work?
What?
It doesn't work? Oh, I thought I copied it right from your page. Sorry. Anyway.
No, it's the title. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, now it's just me. Oh my God, I haven't had anything to drink. Still going crazy. Why won't this work?
I've been drinking lots of Monster Energy, as you recommended.
Okay, anyway, I'll put the slide up at the end with Garrett's details because I'm not able to do it at the time. I'm not that literate. All right. Well, thank you, Garrett. Happy New Year.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, yeah. This is my fault, but it should be thesocialpopulist.substack.com for the URL in the future.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Laura. Oh, you sent me a link. Should we play that at the end, or has the moment passed? You sent me a link.
The moment's passed.
Oh.
It's
all right.
Yeah. Well, it's Glenn Beck saying he loves Tom Paine except the revolutionary part, basically. And then it's actually presented by these Ron Paul movement people, and they're pushing back on Glenn Beck and saying he's dumb, and that they are revolutionaries.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, as I said, Thomas Paine was not really a libertarian.
Okay.
He was a big government guy in some ways.
All right. Well, I'll add that to when I put this out, the edited version out. You can be like, woohoo, and you can add it. Yeah, post-production, you can add that in. No one needs to see how the sausage is made. All right, take care, Garrett. Go shake it. Go have fun in the East Coast. Yeah, woohoo. You're gonna go see the ball drop. Do they still do that?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
Anderson Cooper, is he still doing?
Well, it's gonna be really freaking warm. Maybe I don't know. Probably not, but maybe.
Okay, see you next time. Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks, Tara.
Bye. All right, so that was our last podcast of 2024. Please do like and subscribe. This is I am a novice podcaster, learning as I go, trying to figure out the behind the scenes and on scene stuff. But we had Garrett on today to talk about Schrödinger's American Revolution, basically focusing on both. There's parts of what he called the far left and the alt right that want to crap on the revolution, I guess, for different reasons, but end up at the same point. And he wanted to push back against that while at the same time not diminishing or pretending that lots of the bad stuff that went along with it. All right. So thank you very much. Happy New Year. Please do like and subscribe. If you have a morbid symptom you think we should be covering, let me know. If you want to come on and be a guest host or, join the panel about something, let me know. And if you have some extra money and you want to support this project, fantastic. The first thing I will do is get better lighting and sound system and this type of thing, but we'll see how we go. All right. On that note, Happy New Year, everybody. See you next time.